Hey there, world history students. Today we're going to have a short screencast on traditional or ancient China. We're going to focus on its geography, where it is, and the political structure, meaning the type of government that emerges in ancient China. Where is China's geographic origins as an ancient society? Well, it goes back over 4,000 years, and unlike a lot of the other places we've looked at, the Indus River Valley, Egypt, the Middle East, parts of Europe, China develops in kind of a distinct isolation. It's very much removed from those other early river valley civilizations or other competing civilizations. What is this geographic isolation? Well, it has a lot to do with the barriers that surround any society that emerges in East Asia. There's the Gobi Desert to the north, the Himalayan mountains to the west, and the Pacific Ocean to the east. If you look at this map right here, and I'll go right back to that, uh, ancient China emerges on these two river valleys in East Asia. You can see Himalayan mountains to the west, the Gobi Desert to the north, and of course the Pacific Ocean. You have real natural barriers that hem in any civilization that's going to happen there. I mentioned that there are two river valleys that a lot of this civilization develops along. One is called the Huanghe River Valley, commonly known in English as the Yellow River, as well as the Yangtze River, which is to the south of that. And this allows a farming community to emerge just like you'd see in many other river valley civilization type situations. It's a vast peasant population that emerges there. These river valleys are pretty productive when it comes to growing crops. They grow things like millet, wheat, and rice. Millet and wheat more in the north, rice more in the south. But in any case, they're going to figure out effective ways at maximizing their food production. Some of these examples include farming through terraces, where you carve into the sides of mountains to kind of boost the amount of land that you're potentially bringing into production. I want to read you this excerpt on farming in ancient China. This is from a history textbook. The rich soil and abundant water in the Huanghe Valley aided the growing of crops. The farmers raised, in particular, two types of grains, millet and wheat. To protect their fields from flooding, the Huanghe farmers built dikes. These earth mounds kept the river within its banks, so they're able to manipulate the landscape. The farmers also dug irrigation canals to carry river water to their fields in dry weather. One of the reasons for the rise in government in the Huanghe Valley was the need for an organized way of regulating the dike and canal system. So, with all of this pressure to manipulate their environment to grow food, that becomes a stimulus for creating a government. This is often what plays out in early river valley civilizations. River valleys, they stimulate early governments and empires, as I just mentioned, because of the need to manipulate the landscape. The civilizations that emerge in China begin to see themselves, or the civilization begins to see itself as the central power in this particular region, and they'll refer to themselves as the Middle Kingdom. This is how early China saw itself, because it didn't have to confront many other civilizations that it competed with, even though there's going to be violence and strife within it. It saw itself as the Middle Kingdom. An idea that, or a concept that goes along with this, is this concept of what's called ethnocentrism, which is the idea that you judge other cultures by your own standards. And in ancient China, since they saw themselves as the Middle Kingdom or center of the world, this is kind of an example of ethnocentrism in action that you can witness in ancient China. What does that political system of ancient China look like? Well, like so many other political systems, it has an emperor at the top. You have one individual who tends to accumulate a whole lot of power, and they rule through a government and a military and so forth. But one concept I want to shine a light on for you is what made people buy into this emperor's rule and this civilization that he commanded. People tended to buy into the rule of the emperor and the power of the emperor through this idea, what is called the mandate of heaven, which is a justification on one's right to rule. People tended to believe that if the emperor was in charge and they were ruling the kingdom effectively, it was because they were favored by the gods, by the supernatural powers of heaven at the time. But if they would start to falter and lose their grip, or maybe there's a famine or some natural disaster or something going on, this could be seen by a rival group to overthrow them, because it would seem as though they lost this mandate or support of heaven. And this was first used when the Zhou dynasty, or spelled Zhou, overthrew the Shang dynasty, which preceded it. You don't need to know these names at all, but I just wanted to show you that these dynasties or ruling families lost and gained power because of this mandate of heaven. And this gives way to what's called the dynastic cycle, which is the rise, recovery, peak, and fall of new ruling groups. And you can see the graphic over here. Chinese history is replete and filled with this, the idea that one group is in charge, one group holds power, but they eventually lose the mandate of heaven and they're replaced by another dynasty, another ruling family. Day-to-day life in ancient China is ruled through what is called feudalism or feudal rule that looks very similar to what you would have seen in the Middle East or in parts of Europe later on, which is the idea that you have an emperor figure who rules through nobility, various nobles and families, and they dispense land to a large peasant population to work. And the deal is, within feudalism, if you're looking for a simple way to understand it, it's the idea of land for service. And in this case, the emperor and the nobles give out land, peasants work land in exchange for protection. That's the feudalism element within ancient China. And you're going to read about this in the reading that's tagged to this. The emperor in ancient China is at the top. That's no surprise. Emperors are always at the top. And they have a government and military. But what's unique in ancient Chinese history, and this is one thing I want you to zero in on, is that peasants are not at the very bottom of the social spectrum, the social pyramid. Slaves, while we would expect to be there, are there, but merchants actually, people of business, traders, tend to be lower in social rank in ancient China, where peasants get a little bit more respect and social ranking, you might say. This isn't always the case in other societies, as in Europe or the Middle East or parts of the Mediterranean. But in China, peasants get more respect. This doesn't mean peasants are living well. Please don't confuse it with that. But in terms of their social rank, they do better. Ancient China sets about doing a whole range of big achievements. One of these is going to be the construction of various walls. Now, much of this gets kind of built together in what's called the Great Wall of China, and that comes along later, a little bit after this period that we're talking about in the ancient past. But there are going to be walls that get constructed in the ancient world, going back to all of these various dynasties. Don't need to worry about any of these. But these massive construction projects are symbolic and are a testament to how powerful this civilization was. Another example of just how powerful ancient China was were the personal construction projects that Chinese emperors built and had ordered to be done. One of these is called the Terracotta Soldiers, the Terracotta Army. To better understand this, I want you to go to the notes that are linked in the plan, because this is a screencast and you obviously can't click on it through the screencast. Watch this 2-minute clip and just watch it and expect that there's probably going to be a question on the quiz about it. One other thing we wanted to bring to your attention about ancient China are some of the cultural practices. And one of these peculiar cultural practices that goes on in ancient China is what is called foot binding, where women are going to be, at a young age, have their foot bound up to make it very difficult to walk. And this is going to be seen as a symbol of beauty, as a symbol of cultural power. But it's going to be this extraordinarily painful and difficult process that's going to be practiced going back to ancient China. It's going to be carried on into the 20th century. But this is a kind of cultural practice that you'd see associated with ancient China. With that, your task is simply this, to make sure you watch through the Edpuzzle and think about the questions that pop up in it. But the only questions you need to answer are the 5-question quiz that is attached to this. Now, one other thing I want you to realize, there's a reading attached to this plan. Your task is to do that reading by next Tuesday and use it as the basis for a discussion. And the instructions for that are going to be posted a little bit later. All right. Thank you.